This is part 2 of a video series examining self-plagiarism in film music. If you've mistakenly come here and are instead looking for part 1, that can be found by clicking on the annotation I've added to the video. I ended part 1 by raising a question. Why do so many film composers self-plagiarize with surprising regularity? Answering that question requires first understanding how the scoring process works on most Hollywood productions. In many cases, the deck is squarely stacked against the composer creating anything entirely original by the time they are brought onto a project. That isn't necessarily a bad thing either, though. It is important to remember that filmmaking is a collaborative venture, and by necessity, film scoring is immensely collaborative as well. As a result, much of the scoring process can be taken out of the hands of the composer entirely. Indeed, it is rare on a film project for a composer to have the opportunity to create a score without input from others. James Horner spoke about this in many interviews.
It's just one of those things, you give up certain things being a film composer. You're working for somebody else, so it's not my movie. No matter how artistic I want to be, or clever, or beautiful, it belongs to somebody else. I'm working for somebody else. And I have to make the movie for them. It's their movie.
Composers are often hired because of previous work. It is not uncommon for a composer to be asked to duplicate something they wrote in the past, or to copy the work of another composer. As Horner said, quote, "Sometimes, of course, when the producers are taking a chance on me, and the music budget is $200,000, and they say to me that they want such and such a score, and I say, well, that score has been done, let me give you something different, they say, give us something different on our next film. This is the kind of score we want for this film." Even if a composer is not explicitly asked to copy an earlier piece of music, such a request can arrive implicitly in the form of a temp score. When a film is being edited, the director, editor, and music editor frequently will assemble a temporary score using music from a variety of sources, though most temp scores are constructed using music from other films. Temp scores are often used during test screenings and help with the editing process, since film is often unwatchable without music. Richard Dreyfuss illustrates this principle in the following clip.
We would like to show you this evening a scene from Jaws without John's music.
Hooper, get clear of the barrel. Hooper! Tie it up, will you?
Your turn, Quinn.
Hooper, where are you? Hooper, hurry it up now, tie it on. Hurry it up, he's coming straight for us. Don't screw it up now.
Don't wait for me.
Come on, Hooper, come on, hurry it up, tie it on.
Now.
Kill it, Quint. Kill it! Now! Shoot! Time! What were you doing? You knew I had to get a clean shot right in the head. All right, let's see how long that barrel takes to bring him up.
Okay, now, in this scene, for instance, there are 4 or 5 key moments that have to be underscored, where the audience has to be told where to go. Now you're going to see what John adds to a film.
Coming. Hooper, get clear of the barrel. Hooper! Tie it up, will you?
Your turn, Quinn.
Hooper, where are you? Hooper, hurry it up now, tie it on. Hurry it up, he's coming straight for us. Don't screw it up now.
Don't wait for me.
Come on, Hooper, come on, hurry it up, tie it on.
Now.
Kill it, quick, kill it! Now! Shoot! Time! What were you doing? You knew I had to get a clean shot right in the head. All right, let's see how long
Temp scores also become useful as a way of informing directors and producers who to hire to compose music for the project. As a result, when a composer is finally brought onto a project, there's often a modicum of music already attached to it. Not every composer will listen to a temp score, but many do. James Horner once said in an interview, quote, "My attitude towards temp tracks is perhaps different than most composers. I really think they're useful." Temp tracks can cause problems though, Horner explains. That is very often what one is up against, where a producer or director has seen the movie and has temp tracked it with someone else's music, has fallen in love with that score, and says this is what we want, period. You try and fight against that a little bit, but sometimes you can't. I've been told very amazing things where they say we want exactly that kind of score, we want that exact kind of cue. Just put it in your own language, but that's exactly what we want. It can be hard for a composer to challenge such a request. In the later stages of his career, Horner's solution was simply to turn down the project. Quote, "If I'm told that's what they want, then I say fine, get him." Of course, that doesn't work if you're the composer they've temped their film with. It can be extremely difficult to turn down work, even if one is uncomfortable with such requests. There are very few composers who have that kind of career security. You just never know what might be your last project.
And there are now, tens if not hundreds of composers writing music, where when I was starting there were 2 or 3. Some of us have been around quite a while now and have started together. Hans and I knew each other when I was working on early movies, and he was a synthesizer programmer. And he got his early movies around the same time, and a lot of people have sort of dropped by the wayside. Hollywood seems to seek its own water level.
Right.
So a lot of people try and break in and will get 1 film or 2 films, and then you'll never hear from them again. It obviously makes it more difficult because there are not that many jobs, and there are a lot of people competing for not that many jobs. But it's hasn't really affected me per se, but it affects, I would say it affects other composers.
I suspect what drives most composers to self-plagiarize, though, are deadlines. Most film scores need between 8 and 12 weeks to be completed. That timeline requires a composer to write an average of 2 minutes of music per day. Many projects, however, force composers to work with far less time than that, which can seriously impact a composer's ability to be creative or original. The scores for Black Sunday and Star Wars were recorded within months of each other, and John Williams only had 6 weeks to finish the music for Star Wars. It is therefore unsurprising that there are similarities between some of the themes in those films. For Troy, James Horner had less than 2 weeks to complete a score for a film that was nearly 3 hours long, after he was brought on at the last minute to replace Gabriel Yared. In light of those circumstances, the Danger theme's prominence is hardly surprising. Replacement scores, while not endemic to the industry, do occur regularly, and are often written under similar time constraints. Composers are forced to cut corners, and oftentimes that means self-plagiarism. Gheorghe Ubai's Torn Music Rejected Film Scores lists an average of 6 rejected scores per year between 1966 and 2008, and it is important to note that Ubai's list is curated, not comprehensive. The actual average per year is likely higher. However, Hollywood releases hundreds of films per year, and it is unlikely that more than 5 to 10% of those films feature replacement scores in any given year. Self-plagiarism in film music is complicated by a wrinkle of industry standard that composers in other fields rarely encounter. Nearly all film music is written as work for hire. This means the studio that owns the film, not the composer, controls most rights associated with the music. This theoretically prevents composers from reusing the same music in multiple films without permission. When a composer does self-plagiarize, a legal can of worms may be opened because the ownership of that music may not lie entirely with the composer.
But it's a medium that is so proprietary, it almost works against the creative process. But almost any other art form, you create or can create a whole series of paintings, using that analogy for a moment. Unlike that world, the film world is very proprietary. When I do a film score, I am basically nothing more than a fancy pencil for hire. I don't own any of the music when I'm done. It belongs to the film company. And likewise, when I'm done, even if I come up with something astounding that I may want to revisit as though I was a painter, and I say, oh God, I'm going to do another one right away. In the world of film composition, you can't do that because you don't own the creation. And therefore, each time out has to be a completely clean canvas, as it were. And if I come up with an interesting idea on film A and want to explore that, it's very hard to do that and bring it into film B without somebody saying, hey, that belongs to us, you can't do that. So my world is very, very closed down creatively compared to other disciplines, dance, painting, almost anything else I can think of, writing. It's just amazing. And with music, at least from my perspective, everybody feels that they recognize music, recognize themes, so everybody feels they always recognize somebody's style, or doesn't that thing sound like something else? And that's always part of the film world.
Considering his reputation, it is ironic to hear James Horner acknowledge this issue, because he so clearly failed in adhering to his own understanding of the industry. In the same way that Tyler Bates was sued for plagiarizing from Elliot Goldenthal, James Horner could have been sued for his reuse of musical material like the Danger theme, though probably not the Danger theme itself, since it appears in Wagner and Rachmaninoff and would therefore be in the public domain. However, as far as I know, Horner was never sued for self-plagiarism. The truth is that the vast majority of lawsuits involving music copyright never make it to court, and are instead settled behind closed doors. There are, as far as I know, no public cases of a film composer being sued by a studio for self-plagiarism. I have been assured by industry professionals that such lawsuits must have occurred and been settled, yet I have been unable to verify that fact. One would think that if Horner had been sued for self-plagiarism, he wouldn't have continued to use the Danger theme and other melodies repeatedly and so blatantly. I wonder though if there isn't another reason why there seems to be no lawsuits involving self-plagiarism. Simply put, it would be bad for business as far as any of the major studios are concerned. Given the time constraints a film composer usually faces when writing music for a film, it is likely that they will self-plagiarize in some way during the course of their career. If a studio were pursuing composers over the kinds of self-plagiarism discussed here, as opposed to say reusing an entire cue wholesale, which a studio almost certainly would object to, what composer would ever feel comfortable working for that studio? There is one other more recent development in the practice of film music that further complicates this issue, that I briefly mentioned in the first video: the rise of the film music production studio, studios where teams of composers collaborate together. Zimmer's Remote Control Productions, formerly Meteor Ventures, is the most widely known of these studios, though others do exist. When a large number of composers from such a studio collaborate on a score, it can become difficult to discern who is responsible for what musical elements. If those musical elements then show up in another score, it can actually become impossible to confidently label such appearances as plagiarism or self-plagiarism, one or the other. To illustrate this point, I'd like to briefly discuss Pirates of the Caribbean: The Curse of the Black Pearl. Officially, Klaus Badelt is the composer of record. However, it's hardly that simple. In the film's credits, Zimmer is identified as the score producer, an unusual title without a clear definition. On the official soundtrack release, he is credited as the score overproducer, a title which is equally ambiguous, and there are 7 other composers with additional music credits. In subsequent interviews, Zimmer has claimed credit for writing all of the major themes in the film. However, due to a clause in his contract for the film The Last Samurai, Zimmer was unable to actually take credit as a composer on any other film at the same time, hence the score producer credit. This mishmash of composers created a score that has been described as both highly derivative and as a compilation of Remote Control's greatest hits. If you're at all familiar with Zimmer's catalog of scores, you'll have a hard time disagreeing with that sentiment. When we do hear something in the score that is also in another remote control soundtrack, such as with any of the examples you just heard, it is essentially impossible to know which composer wrote that specific cue. And this is not unique to Curse of the Black Pearl or the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. This is a problem for a lot of soundtracks coming out of remote, regardless of who the credited composer is.
Hotel set. We'll be landing in Los Angeles in about 20 minutes.
Really quick, can you lift up your arm a little bit? Does that hurt? A little bit? Okay. Tender? Go put your arm down. Okay, I need you to look at me. I need you to calm down and I need you to breathe. There you go. Deep breaths. Go. Very good.
Raw power, it could destroy you both. Unnecessary sacrifice to bring peace to this planet. We cannot let the humans pay for our mistakes. It's been an honor serving with you all. Autobots, roll out and roll.
Give me a status. Sir, we're tracking a special ops team under fire in Qatar. They say they're survivors of the base attack.
Survivors. They're poisoned.
It would be possible to know who wrote these cues if we had the official detailed cue sheet submitted to PROs like ASCAP and BMI, but those are almost never made public. That even assumes that the actual composer is listed on the cue sheet. Ghostwriters, representing an ethically dubious gray area in film music, are typically not given any sort of credit, and there are certainly composers who engage in that practice, though I must say that Zimmer does not seem to be one of them. He has always appeared more than willing to credit any of the composers at Remote appropriately. Now, you may get lucky by looking through the clearance libraries maintained by ASCAP and BMI, but that assumes that you know the cue names, which rarely, if ever, match the commercially available titles you'll find on soundtrack releases. They sometimes do though, but you are often left with partial results in any comparison. Consequently, the only accurate way to discern who is responsible for what is to directly ask someone involved in the production. Now, none of this is meant to criticize or denigrate Zimmer or any other composer that works in this way. It's important to remember that composing for film is not a solitary endeavor, nor one focused on creating pure art. Collaboration is required, and a composer's explicit purpose is to make the film a better film with their score, not create music that can stand alone in the concert hall without the accompanying picture. That film composers are capable of doing both at the same time is frankly impressive, and speaks to the incredible talent one can find throughout all levels of the industry. Zimmer is not a hack for employing other composers in his studio. When you're asked to create scores for 6 to 8 films a year, as Zimmer often does, you're going to need help. No person can write upwards of 16 hours of music in a calendar year without some assistance. And when you add the intense deadlines that Hollywood studios often place upon composers on top of that, thinking that any composer should operate entirely on their own is ludicrous. Zimmer is still more than capable of crafting original and thought-provoking scores. Interstellar ranks high on my list of favorite soundtracks in recent memory. For his more derivative scores, critics have to realize that it's quite likely that that is exactly what he was asked to create, and there's nothing wrong with that. The machinations of Hollywood are oriented primarily towards business. Art is necessarily a secondary concern. Self-plagiarism is at this point a fact of life in the film music industry. That its existence is often used as a way to discredit film music as a serious artistic venture is unfortunate, as self-plagiarism is not unique to film music, and its causes are myriad and often out of the composer's control. None of the composers I've mentioned in relation to self-plagiarism are unskilled hacks. Horner was a talented composer, and the vast majority of his musical output included very original scores. Yes, many of his most high-profile releases cribbed from his own previous scores, as well as many famous concert works. But those only reflect a small body of his total musical output. Many of these composers have won Oscars, among numerous other accolades. Passing judgment on a composer outright for the content of a score without first-hand knowledge of a film's production is outrageously unfair, and neither of these videos is meant as an indictment of Horner or any of the other composers mentioned. That doesn't mean self-plagiarism should be dismissed or ignored though. It remains an important issue in the industry today, and one that composers, Hollywood insiders, and film music enthusiasts should continue to discuss. In addition to these two videos, I have also uploaded a number of the audio examples from both videos separately. You can find those links below in the description. Thanks for watching.